Okay, welcome everyone, and thank you so much for joining our webinar, International Student Settlement Supports Across and Within Sectors, Challenges and Best Practices in BC, Nova Scotia, and Ontario. I'm Lisa Bruner. I recently finished my PhD at the University of British Columbia, where I also work as a sessional lecturer, international student advisor, and regulated Canadian immigration consultant. The purpose of this session is to have a conversation across sectors and provinces to highlight some of the key issues and initiatives being taken to support international student settlement. To do that, we're fortunate to have three amazing speakers, each bring a really nuanced perspective based on years of varied work and research related to the topic. So first, we'll hear from Dr. Jenny Francis, who is a geography faculty member at Langara College in Vancouver. Her research explores immigration, education, and employment pathways for rural and urban international students in BC, particularly how education processes are impacting international students and their families, how federal and provincial policy can produce more socially just outcomes, and how international student flows are changing the Canadian post-secondary landscape at the college level. Dr. Francis's previous research focused on the experiences of refugees in Canada, especially around housing, social welfare, and access to social services and interaction with the criminal justice system. Next, we'll hear from Dr. Rupa Trilokar, who is an associate professor in the Faculty of Education at York University. She comes to an academic career after 20 years of experience as an international education professional in Canada, India, and the US. Her research focuses on government policy and the internationalization of Canadian higher education, student experiential learning through international education, and internationalizing pre-service teacher education. She's an expert in Canadian federal policy on international education, and her contributions to international higher education include examining the changing relationship between the state, foreign policy, and education through critical comparative policy studies. Finally, we will hear from Jennifer Westman, who led the development of EduNova's award-winning Study and Stay program before leading a team of retention coordinators to expand the program across 4 Atlantic provinces. She is currently developing a curriculum for a new Study and Stay project using app technology to support international students to settle and work in Nova Scotia. Jennifer has worked in international education across Canada for over 15 years as a university instructor, program manager, and in community development. And she also works for the Centre of Rural Aging and Health at Nova Scotia Community College. Now, we were also scheduled to have Alex Kang present, who's a senior program advisor with the Immigrant Integration Unit within the BC Ministry of Municipal Affairs. He manages the BC Settlement and Integration Services Program, which provides funding to settlement agencies across the province to support a range of temporary residents. Unfortunately, Alex is unable to join us today, but he has a very good excuse because his wife went into labor this morning. So we're giving him a pass. We're thinking of him and his family, and also very thankful for his insights, which informed this workshop. So the 4 of us are located across the traditional and ancestral territories of several different peoples. Jenny and I are in what is now known as BC, and we join you from the unceded territory of the Musqueam people. Dr. Chilokakar joins us from the Mississaugas of the Credit Territory and the traditional territory of the Huron-Wendat and the Haudenosaunee. And Jennifer joins us from Mi'kmaq territory. Because it's a virtual event, the servers and cables that enable our communication pass through even more lands, and we want to acknowledge and thank the caretakers of those lands, as well as the land itself. We also acknowledge that when we talk about settlement, we're also talking about an ongoing process of settler colonialism that we are unevenly bound up and complicit in, and it's one of the many ethical complexities of this subject. So to quickly set the stage, as I'm sure many of you know, the number of international students in Canada has grown rapidly over the past 2 decades. This is based on some rough numbers just for comparative purposes from Project Atlas in 2022. Um, about 9% of international post-secondary students worldwide are in Canada, and this is up from 2% about 20 years ago. Proportionally, Canada now hosts among the largest shares of international students in comparison to its total higher education population. So in the past few years, it has surpassed Australia in this regard, as you can see. And this growth is happening at the intersection of Canada's economic, immigration, and higher education systems. So, from the immigration side, the Canadian government has for decades tried to perfect how to select more, supposedly economic successful and quote unquote easily integrated immigrants. And that has really led to a multi step system where permanent residents are increasingly selected from temporary foreign workers who are already in Canada, known as multi step or two step immigration, and especially from the pool of former international students who are on post graduation work permits who have been positioned as ideal immigrants. This in turn positions employers as powerful selection actors as workers compete in the labor market for jobs which qualify them for immigration programs. And it's also contributed to a privatization of settlement, which puts the burden of settlement onto um, temporary residents themselves and in some cases employers, and as we will discuss next, the higher education system. So on the higher education side, as institutions try to expand despite domestic demographic and public funding constraints, we see international student growth and fees becoming increasingly dependent upon. And as these numbers increase, higher education institutions become another kind of subnational immigration actor, now playing new roles in settlement and immigrant selection. The proportion of economic immigrants with previous study in Canada increased from 6% in 2000 to 38% in 2019. I believe it's even higher now. I've heard that it is more than 50% of all economic immigrants had previous study in Canada, but can't confirm that, but I do know it's higher than 38%. The key message is that the settlement of international students that occurs as part of this complex three-step migration process as a student, as a postgrad work permit holder, and as a permanent resident is what we refer to as education. And this is what we're discussing today. So at this point, we will move on to the three speakers. Each speaker will have 15 minutes, and we're leaving lots of time at the end for questions and discussion. There's a Q&A button below your video, and you are welcome to submit your questions throughout the workshop there, and we'll be keeping track of them. You can upvote the questions that you'd most like answered, and then we will answer them after all three speakers have spoken. So without further ado, I am very pleased to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Francis.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Hi, everybody. Thanks for attending our presentation. So my research is called Study, Work, Stay, Pathways and Outcomes for International Students in BC. And I teach at Langara College in Vancouver. So the project is led by Langara College, where I work in Vancouver, in collaboration with the College of New Caledonia, or CNC, in Prince George. And thank you, Lisa, for the previous acknowledgement. I just want to say we're very grateful to the nations on whose territory this project and presentation is being carried out. So I'll just start with a quick overview of our project. So it investigates international student experiences and outcomes along the study, work, stay pathway with a few goals in mind to bring policy, student intent, and reality into closer alignment, to enable more students to achieve success as they define it, and to reduce the gaps between opportunity and responsibility for students, post-secondary institutions, employers, and policymakers. Today, I can just give you a really brief taste of what we're learning, but we will be making additional information available throughout 2023. So Langara College in Vancouver has around 22,000 students. Around half of those are international students. CNC in Prince George, BC has around 5,000 students, and a quarter of those are international students. We also brought together a few community partners to work on this project: Immigrant and Multicultural Services Society in Prince George, South Vancouver Neighbourhood House in Vancouver, and Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada, or IRCC, was kind of a silent supportive partner during the project. We collected data through a survey and interviews. So we started with a full list of international students enrolled at Langara or CNC since 2016, or graduating from either college after 2018. And we sent the survey to a sample group of 7,000. Ultimately, we received nearly 1,300 surveys, and we completed 84 interviews with current and former international students and professional people whose work involves international students. Due to the length of the survey and the interviews, which were both only available in English, the experiences of the most marginalized students were most likely left out of our study. So with respect to region of origin, around half of our respondents came to Canada from South Asia, especially from India, with the rest coming from a range of other regions, as you can see there on the slide. Just over half of our respondents had an active study permit. A smaller number had a work permit in orange and green, and then a few had already obtained PR, which is there in dark green. There were quite a few prefer not to answer in this question. So this slide shows respondents' immigration intentions. At least 2/3 indicate that they would like to stay in Canada. But perhaps even more revealing, though, is that only 5% indicated an intention to remain temporarily. In fact, though, fewer than 30% of two-year diploma holders are likely to obtain PR or permanent residence over 10 years, according to Statistics Canada. And so this points to a real mismatch between student and policy intent. We also asked survey respondents about their education prior to coming to Canada. So many Langara students had completed only high school. International students at CNC were more likely to have earned a degree previously. That's because of the post-degree diploma programs in HR, IT, and business, which are heavily marketed to international students there. This was also reflected in the age of respondents. 75% of Langara students we spoke to were under 25, while only half of the respondents from CNC were under 25. Respondents shared their educational challenges in the survey, with Langara students more likely to note each of the challenges you can see there. Finances, which is not really an educational challenge per se, really stood out at both institutions. So the impact of non-educational challenges on studies also came up really frequently in interviews. And these include unhealthy eating, cultural differences, domestic violence, pregnancy, abortion, sexual exploitation, fear around reporting, arrest, detention, deportation, addiction, suicide, becoming victims of fraud, and having to hide such problems from family. So a key point that I want to emphasize is that education is really just one piece of the puzzle for international students. We also heard about educational challenges in interviews. So students didn't mention it at all, but low English skills and lack of academic preparedness came up often in interviews with professional stakeholders. Interviewees also mentioned the outsized role of education agents whose focus is profit. And then on the student side, there's also a lack of understanding of available resources. With respect to the college context, case managers and counselors are overloaded, and there's a perception that post-secondary institutions focus on recruitment over student success in the context of an overall lack of accountability. Turning to employment, approximately 80% of our survey respondents were working and had one job. Most were earning minimum wage, which at the time of the interview was $14.60, with just under 10% earning more than $20 per hour. With respect to gender, which is not shown here, women reported lower average earnings than men. Much of our respondents' earnings went towards housing, with a very worrying proportion spending more than 50% or more than 75% of their income on housing. And then unsurprisingly, most reported that their income was not sufficient to meet their needs. Many students we spoke to mentioned needing to work more than 20 hours per week. So that restriction has been lifted for some students, but instructors and counselors are concerned about the impact, especially in the context of immigration goals taking precedence over education. Students who were interviewed also commented on financial hardship. For example, one told us, "It's horrible what I'm passing through right now. I can't even study or submit my homework because I haven't got my basic needs covered properly." And another one said, "I constantly have to live on the edge because I don't earn enough to afford food every day." And in fact, reliance on food banks came up repeatedly. And obviously that's not the intent of students or their families or the program that they would be relying on food banks. This chart shows employment challenges reported in the survey. So there are many points here. I'm just going to highlight two. First, finding work related to their field of study figured really prominently among Langara international students. And this could be for a few reasons, including the fact that many Langara students only had a high school education from back home and were only pursuing a 2-year diploma here. However, a career, especially in not category A or B, as is required to obtain PR after a postgraduate work permit, typically requires more than that. Meanwhile, CNC students located in Prince George struggle to find work in their region. So these findings really underscore the need for a range of employment services to be available to international students, as well as a regionalization strategy to better connect labor market needs with supply. Additionally, many students lack career planning and direction, as well as the soft skills that employers need. Massive labor market impact assessment fraud and the exploitation of postgraduate work permit holders by employers and consultants also really stood out in interviews. Given there are a large number of young people in BC who really can't afford to be here and who have insufficient labor market preparation, it's perhaps no wonder that exploitation is occurring. And then finally, there's a need for a provincial strategy for international education and employment, especially as two-step migration becomes increasingly important and the numbers continue to grow. So I just want to touch on a few of the immigration challenges as well. So I've kind of touched on study, work, and this is the stay part. So many interviewees mentioned the need for greater flexibility from IRCC around educational breaks. Interviewees also emphasized the uncertainty, vulnerability, and stress that arise due to temporary status, especially in the context of a lack of provincial funding and insufficient provincial funding for services for temporary residents. Students also frequently receive poor advice from misleading or misinformed consultants, and this can lead to breaching visa conditions, detention, becoming undocumented, and deportation. And all of these challenges, in addition to being away from family, have really significant negative impacts on mental health. So coming to our conclusions, well, first, academic achievement was not the major concern for most of the international students in our survey. So that really underscores the importance of migration and economic goals. With respect to work, international students need better supports during and after their studies to enter the world of work. Students really need to start transitioning from study to work while they're studying. So what should be the role of post-secondary institutions and governments in supporting this transition? Then, given that most intend to stay, international students really need access to settlement services, but as temporary residents, they don't qualify for most services outside the college. So there's an opportunity for post-secondary institutions to work more closely with settlement services. However, the federal government's intention is that most students will not stay. So who will fund those collaborations, and how do we raise awareness among students? We identified some divergent stakeholder priorities. So the current system is actually working quite well for employers. International students are effectively the new temporary foreign workers, and their impact in the economy is to reduce payroll costs for businesses overall. Um, Post-secondary institutions struggling to make ends meet in a context of reduced provincial contributions also benefit from the international student tuition fees. So how do we make the system work better for international students? After all, they're not just numbers. Finally, we wanted students, we got people. So the idea seemed to be that post-secondary institutions would bring in students, perfectly self-contained units that could be slotted neatly into classrooms and would then return home. Instead, we got people with their messy lives, dreams, families, hopes, struggles, and so on. So to address the issues we identified, we have a few recommendations. So we've separated the recommendations into 3 categories. So the federal government, IRCC, post-secondary institutions, and then the provincial government. So to IRCC, we ask for more flexibility around educational breaks and to remove dual intent provisions. To give postgraduate work permit holders access to settlement services, perhaps through funded collaborations between post-secondary institutions and settlement agencies. To require English language testing as part of the study permit application, so take this out of the hands of colleges because they do not know how to self-regulate. To increase the initial required funds to 20,000 per year to more accurately reflect the cost of living, and to convene a national body, perhaps along the LIT model, to assemble stakeholders to discuss international education. And I think we're going to hear a kind of similar idea later in this presentation. Post-secondary institutions, we ask that they recruit students who are academically prepared to succeed in post-secondary, and to end the extreme reliance on agents whose focus is profit. Their focus is not student success, but profit. To increase the transparency of data on student success, employment after graduation, and how international tuition fees are spent. To provide employment services and career counseling for international students, and to recruit from a wider variety of markets. Finally, the provincial government, it would be great if they would create a regionalization strategy to better match labor market needs and supply, to provide better oversight of employment relationships involving labor market impact assessments. Creating accountability measures for post-secondary institutions is absolutely critical. Giving postgraduate work permit holders and ideally also international students in their last year of studies full access to Work BC services. And finally, opening up the provincial nominee program to the trades and ensuring the availability of apprenticeships would all go a really long way. Overall, our findings emphasize the need to provide holistic supports to the whole persons that we invite to study in our institutions, work in our province, and stay in our country. I hope our research and presentation has inspired some ideas for all of us to move forward in doing so. Thank you so much.
Hi, everyone. I'll move on to the sharing with you an initiative I was part of last summer. So I really appreciate, thanks, Lisa and my colleagues for this webinar, especially since it focuses on settlement supports and community supports for international students. So my name is Rupa, as I was mentioned. I do work at York University, but the reason the slides say Sheridan is because I'm sharing with you an initiative I was part of that was initiated and led by Sheridan College in Ontario. So just by way of a background, over the last couple of years, I think pre-COVID even, but definitely during the COVID period, lots of articles in the news about the exploitation of international students, which in itself is interesting because I don't think I've heard the terms exploitation connected with international students before this time period. But a lot in the news media causing concern, not only from post-secondary institutions, but the community overall. And all of these sort of going mainstream, raising a lot of alarm bells, especially in this particular community that, where this initiative began, which is the Brampton community, where there were many international students studying, not only in institutions within the Brampton area, but as far as Montreal, but living in Brampton, and mostly from the Punjabi community from India. A lot of finger pointing starting out as a result of some of this media coverage as to who is responsible for the situation of international students, of Indian students, of Punjabi students in this Brampton area. Is it the government? Is it the post-secondary institutions who are really the ones who are directly benefiting? That's what a lot of folks seem to perceive, that it's the post-secondary institutions that eventually make the big bucks from recruiting international students. Is it the recruiters? So a lot of finger pointing in this Brampton community about who was going to be held responsible for what was happening, and a real acknowledgement that this had become an issue that needed attention. So it's very interesting that a lot of these difficulties brought the community together in a very interesting way. It prompted discussions, and of course was a lot of finger pointing, as I said, to post-secondary institutions, including Sheridan College. But interesting and refreshing was the approach that the community took on. They thought, okay, this is a time when there is need to really think through, to bring these discussions to the surface. And rather than start finger pointing, let's think of how we can shift this whole tide around. And perhaps, Brampton being the center of a lot of these issues and problems, how might we change that as a community through a community approach to make Brampton sort of illustrate or become a leader in understanding what a best practice model would look like in terms of international student support, and really a rethinking on what it means to support international students. That includes their safety, their well-being, and their inclusion in the broader community. Again, this idea that has been raised already by Lisa and Jenny, that, education and bringing education and immigration together shifts how we need to consider international students as community members in the long run. So in the city of Brampton, actually, starting the fall of 2022, Sheridan College took the lead, but definitely worked very cooperatively at a very grassroots level, community-driven initiative in bringing together lots of different stakeholders, as you can see from the co-chairs, the members at large, the secretariat, various community members that were invested and interested in shifting what was happening in Brampton, bringing these to a round table to discuss their experiences, their understanding of the problems, the issues in relation to international students, and then thinking of a way moving forward. What was the way? What is the solution for Brampton to deal with this issue, considering that there was large-scale acknowledgement that Brampton was interested in continuing hosting international students, but wanted to recognize that this was a real issue and there was exploitation in the community in relation to these students. So what happened was, as a result of these roundtable conversations, meetings, there was a four-step process that came to be. And the idea, again, was to really think about ways to move forward Brampton as a community to illustrate to the rest of, communities equally invested in international students, how this tide can turn around, what needs to be done. And a very interesting aspect of this initiative was, okay, an acknowledgement that we need to stop finger pointing at each other, but thinking about how each of us are responsible and how each of us can collaborate to really change things around. So the roundtable that was established met 5 times over the fall and winter of last year, and they broke their work into many different steps. They first came together to really understand how each of them was viewing the problem, what they saw as the issues in terms of international students, and what they understood in terms of the experience. They did bring in, a good, thorough literature review. They looked at research that was done, which I think is pretty creditable in terms of thinking about what they can learn from this research. And interestingly, through this exercise, they had more data, which was missing in terms of exactly the number of public and private institutions that were enrolling international students in the Peel area, and the kinds of supports that were lacking in terms of, students that were brought in. And this is where they started realizing that a lot of international students in the region, in that area, were really not studying in Brampton at all, but they were living within that community because of the community supports that they had. The roundtable also started having a very clear discussion on the kinds of solutions they'd like to see. And the outcome of those meetings, 5 meetings from these community members, was this idea that Brampton and Sheridan, taking the lead, plan a summit and eventually draft a charter of best practices to change the tide within the Brampton community. And this is where I came into the project in working with Sheridan and planning and hosting the summit, which was a very, very interesting experience. So we had the summit last summer, 25th and 26th of July. It engaged a very, very large and diverse community, which was fascinating to watch, to bring people from all walks of life to come in, along with students, obviously, domestic and international. A lot of student voice was part and parcel of that discussion. Lots of learning about systemic barriers that all kinds of organizations and students themselves face, and really thinking through about how the community can act a resource for these barriers. A lot of discussion on increased partnership and collaboration, and how does one actually get there. Creating a community charter, as I said, was the end goal. How does one, develop a charter, and how does one make it meaningful in the long run? So the way the summit was organized, the first day was focused on issues and challenges facing international students, and day 2 was focused more on best practices, plans for action, and measures of accountability. So this is just to give you an indication of the kind of attendees and the range of stakeholders that were involved. It's interesting, we had international students, domestic students, residents of Brampton and Peel, people who were landlords in the area who were renting to international students, post-secondary institutions, certainly private career colleges, community organizations, settlement agencies, civil servants, policy makers, immigration and recruitment agents, the police and fire department, the planning folks from the city were involved. It was quite an interesting array, and that was the important part, was bringing all these people at a table to discuss across various issues. And we were very strategic in making sure we had all of the media that had really covered stories on international students attend and participate. And we wanted to make sure that they were not only listening, but also speaking. And we wanted to hear what they had to say about their perspective on these issues. So a lot of thought-provoking discussions. We brought in researchers, practitioners. Lisa was a part of the panels, as well as we had representatives from the Nova Scotia initiative as well. So really, we were very, very fortunate in having a lot of good representation. So lots of, we had several notes. I think I had 75 pages of notes from the summit. We identified about 15 high-level themes. Here are some of the key themes that we heard at the summit about the concern with how students, as was mentioned again by Jenny, how students come in with different expectations, often false expectations when it comes to funding, for example, a clear idea that we need more acknowledgement about the unique challenges of international students, the financial burdens, vulnerability that international students face when it comes to exploitation, especially, as was mentioned, when it comes to gender, when it comes to intersectional identities. So lots of interesting and important recognition in terms of the issues that were covered. We did ask members before and after the summit about what they came in with, what their expectations were, what they felt were the outcomes of that 2-day summit. And it was very reassuring for us that a lot of community members felt that they had a much better understanding of the complexity of the issues when it comes to the international student experience, that they weren't often as one-dimensional as a lot of them had perceived. They also, they had a much higher level of awareness of the quality of work that was already being done in the community. A lot of community members were not aware of the kind of investments that had been made, and people weren't supporting one another in terms of the use of resources already existence in the community. So really a good networking opportunity to build collaborations and partnerships, and really think through again this idea. The whole approach had a collective impact model approach, where really it was about how do we collectively shift the trend that is, continuing right now. How does one become more proactive? How does one as a community work together and really think about moving forward? So as I mentioned, from day one, the idea was to come up with a community charter that would be housed by the city of Brampton, and all of these organizations invested would eventually sign on as a way of being accountable to making sure that the community really shifted practices. So we reviewed different existing charters. For example, the CBI Code of Practice, the Manitoba, which I think at that time was the only province that actually used to have an International Education Act. We looked at the Scarborough Charter on Anti-Black Racism, the Okanagan Charter for Health, so on and so forth. So we really looked even at the charters that were done in Australia and the codes of conduct in Australia, New Zealand, and the kinds of approaches that they used. The UK has come up with a very interesting international student charter. So we really looked very broadly to see what we could learn from a lot of these charters, where and how would Brampton sort of take the next step in drafting this charter. So lots of learning. Like I mentioned, we had tons of notes from the summit. Post the summit, we had a lot of this information. I will share the websites, it's out. A lot of the community members took it on themselves to participate, to provide feedback. So lots of themes that from the summit were taken on in terms of themes we wanted to transport into the charter. So the charter is divided into 3 components. We have the guiding principles on which the charter is based. We have specific action items, and we have specific accountability measures, which is one area that most people were concerned with. How do we make sure that really, because the experience with charters is they remain on file, they remain as paper, and they really have very little teeth in making change. So this idea of how does one actually change things around through specific accountability measures. All in all, there's lots I could say about the charter, and as I mentioned, right now I know that they're looking to see where in the city of Brampton they can house the charter. They're still getting feedback from the community in terms of the charter. It's out there. You will see the website on the PowerPoint slides. You can have access to it. So there's lots of discussion currently in terms of tightening up the charter, making sure it has teeth in terms of implementation. The city of Brampton is looking for funding to make sure that they're able to implement and put in place the mechanisms that are necessary for this Brampton charter to really have teeth again. But all I would say towards the end is that this is a very unique and I would say interesting, unique, and very powerful initiative, because a lot of the other charters, if you see in Australia, New Zealand, and not so much the UK, they're very regulatory in focus. It's the government coming down saying these are regulations. But this is more of a grassroots, ground up initiative, which is very exciting in and of itself, right? It's extremely community focused. It includes voices of different people who are invested. And I think we often lose sight of the number of people invested in the whole international student experience in Canada, especially in the context of education. So I think in that sense, it's really, really unique. That it actually openly and recognizes and accepts that education or education-immigration nexus really impacts and influences policy, relationships, behaviors of various actors, including international students themselves. And this is what the charter and the whole approach is openly doing. It's also focused on, yes, the role of post-secondary institutions and governments is important, but this charter is about the community and about international students being members of the community. A lot of the exploitation that they face is within the community. And so this community focused and approach is very, very unique and important, I would say. And also the view that the international student populations will always change, the trends will change, geopolitical shifts will change. So how do we build a charter? How do we think about Canada's approach to international students, given this constant flux, right? What happened during the pandemic, what will happen post-pandemic? So these, it's very conscious of these shifting trends. So we've learned lots and lots of lessons, and here just are a few that I'm sharing with you. Like I said, there's a lot right now going on in terms of tightening up the charter, ensuring there may be training involved in terms of community members signing the charter, measures of accountability discussions, having ways to really house the charter within the Brampton community. So lots of discussion going on in that respect. But again, a lot in terms of a broader focus on this collective impact, collective model approach, understanding that international students, as was very clear through Jenny's presentation, they are future citizens. So how do we take that perspective from the very onset in terms of understanding international students in this country? And how do you think about their journey holistically from where they begin to think about studying all the way to becoming permanent residents? It's not just about recruitment in terms of academic programs, so really shifting our focus from a broader lens. And in terms of, coordination and collaboration, because really through the summit, we found there were so many community members invested, interested, food banks, for example, but they weren't getting the support they needed from post-secondary institutions to reach international students. So really working within the community, given the resources that already exist, not that there isn't need for more, but there's also wastage and overlap of resources, so really working through those issues. And this idea that regulation is not necessarily the only way forward, which is what a lot of jurisdictions have done in terms of the international students' experience. And this philosophy that we are all of the part of the problem, but we're also part of the solution. So it's really about all of us, all of the community, and all of our investment in hosting international students within our community. So very exciting opportunity to be part of this project. Lots of exciting things going on in the Brampton area, but I guess the key challenge now will be how far they're able to really move towards implementing the charter and implementing the accountability measures outlined there. So here's the websites for the summit. Everything that we did, everything we researched is all out there. The charter, the draft is out there. You're more than welcome to look out for that. And I know within Sheridan College, they're more than willing to work with other community members who are interested in starting this initiative within other communities across Canada. They're very interested in collaborating on these kinds of ventures as well. But hopefully I've shared with you that this is a very interesting, unique approach, and I think one that merits a little bit more research and much more support than perhaps it's getting. But happy to chat with my colleagues and with the rest of you about how all of these aspects we're sharing interconnect. Thanks so much. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I just want to say thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Jenny, and thank you, Rupa. But I wanted just to expand on some of the things that were touched on already in the previous presentations. And my name is Jennifer Westman. I'm presenting on behalf of Edgenova Cooperative, and I'm here to share one of our projects, Study and Stay Connect, as a collaborative support for international students in Nova Scotia. So earlier, Jenny had asked, what can we do to support international students, especially in that transitional stage as they as they move from being a student into they're working, developing their careers and working in after their graduation. And Rupa certainly gave us some great examples of collaboration and how people were invested. So I'd like to, with those things in mind, share some of our successes here in Nova Scotia with the Study and Stay project. I also want to acknowledge that we are in Mi'kmahi here in Nova Scotia, the unceded territory and ancestral homeland of the Mi'kmaq Nation. And in Nova Scotia, we recognize that we are all treaty people. So here's my agenda for the remaining presentation, just to talk to you a little bit about our Study and Stay project in Nova Scotia and how this really grew from some of the international student retention strategies that were happening here. And we've identified some career-related needs, gaps, and opportunities. And as a collaborative model and solution, this EduNova Study and Stay Connect project has shown a lot of successes. So we'll walk you through some of these as well as the program and talk about some of the impact and best practices, certainly that we've seen here in Nova Scotia. So for those of you who have not heard of EduNova, we are a provincial cooperative association of education providers in Nova Scotia. And we started out in 2004, and we have a membership base. So as a cooperative association, our membership is composed of Nova Scotia's colleges and universities, our language schools, and the K-12 schools through the Nova Scotia International Student Program. So all of these stakeholders really work together to bring international students to Nova Scotia and to help them to build their lives and their futures here. So we work very collaboratively together on various projects related to recruitment and retention of international students, as well as our partners through the federal and the provincial government. So together, our vision is to create a place and a space where international students will study, stay, and thrive in Nova Scotia if that's what they choose to do. I just want to give a little shout out to the small but mighty team here at EduNova. And over half of our staff are actually international graduates themselves. And we're also happy to say that a couple of our staff members are also former students and participants in the Study and Stay project. So we value the knowledge, the expertise, the experiences that our international students bring. And we're very certainly happy to have an incredible team here at EduNova, and we work collaboratively on various projects, including our Study and Stay initiative. Okay. So just to give you a little bit of background on our international student retention strategy in Nova Scotia and really how the Study and Stay project came about, goes back to 2014 when a Ray Ivany report was published. And in this report, various stakeholders who had concerns about the state of Nova Scotia, we had the Now or Never report really called out an urgent call to action. So in this report, it said that we will be in dire straits as a province because we have an aging and shrinking population and very low economic growth. So the retention of international students was seen as one of many key strategies as a way to both develop the economy and also to create a space and place for international students within it so that they can succeed here in Nova Scotia. And because EduNova has really a collaborative model in that we historically have worked with many stakeholders and partnerships, we really were champions of Nova Scotia as a leader in international student experience, working together with our partners so we can advance social and economic growth in the province. So previous, I'd say, to 2014, much of what EduNova focused on was that international student recruitment piece. And this quickly shifted into combining both recruitment and the retention of international students. So if we bring students to our province to study, it's our responsibility as well to help and support them to stay if that's what they choose to do. So we continue to have opportunities for collaboration. And in 2022, so right now, the provincial growth is a huge priority. And right now we have about a little under 1 million people, I'd say, in the province of Nova Scotia. By 2060, we have a hefty population growth goal of 2 million people. So there's opportunities for us to work together to support our newcomers and the retention of international students. So that was 2016. That was really the foundation of how the background of the launch of the Study and Stay project was in response to the Ivany report. And the Study and Stay project in its infancy, I guess you could say, as a pilot project, which was only supposed to be 1 year, is now moving into its 7th year. And previously, we were able to support 50 final year international students. So it was our capstone program focused on final year international students as a sort of a transitional model program where we would focus on pre-employment skills and helping students to develop those skills and those early career supports, helping them to network and learn the tools about the resources that are out there and how to access these tools, and also a mentorship component. So we had various components, which I'll talk a little bit more about in future slides. But what I really want to get at right now is that within that first year and 2 years, I'd say, we had a retention success rate of 82%. And because of the success of this project, we did win an award, and we went on to roll out the project pan-Atlantically into the other Atlantic provinces. So New Brunswick, PEI, and Newfoundland and Labrador. And most of those provinces do still have some shape of study and stay programs still happening today, as well as Nova Scotia. So here in Nova Scotia alone, we've supported directly over 400 international students to stay in Nova Scotia with an average retention rate of 86%. So that has exceeded our earlier retention rates of 82%. And the project continues to expand. So we're really excited about a new project. I guess you can say Study and Stay 2.0 through the Study and Stay Connect project. And the Study and Stay Connect project is using app technology to reach a goal of about 2,000 international students over the next 4 years. So under the Study and Stay Connect project, we still continue to offer our capstone program. So that's that program for final year international students. We now are able to support 100 international students from across the province per year. Plus, we have a new study and stay program called the Foundations Program. And this Foundations Program really takes, I guess, the little pieces of the study and stay capstone program, and it's sort of a micro learning model. So this program, the Foundations, is open to all students in all years of study, not just their final year, because that was one of the challenges, is that if we were going to support our international students, we shouldn't have to wait till their final year to support them. Let's start providing supports from the moment they start studying in Nova Scotia until they graduate, and really set them up for success. So this is a beautiful shot of our 97 international students that are part of the current Study and Stay capstone program in their final year. And part of that program involves a retreat. So we do take them out every year to a rural area of Nova Scotia, because we're also, as part of this program, hoping to expose international students to other rural areas and not just urban areas across the province. So there's a little bit of that rural economic development as well. You can see here our institutions that are involved, and those 97 students do come from all of those different institutions. And then, of course, our government funders, the province through Nova Scotia Department of Advanced Education, and our federal partner, Atlantic Canada Opportunities Agency. And one of the partners that's I just also want to give a shout out to is one of our private sector partners through OnPoint, which is an organization that really works on that mentorship piece and helping to support our students to be able to have access to different employers. So this is really a model of our post-secondary institutions working together with our government partners and our private sector partners. So one of I think the ways that this program has been so successful is that it's really very much student-centered. It focuses on the participants, the international students who are participating in the program. And every year we've done, since 2016, a needs assessment with each group, with each cohort. So year after year, these are sort of the key, I guess, needs that arise. And immigration is always up there as number one, of course. So we do connect the participating students to the immigration resources, both at their campuses and also our federal and provincial partners. We also support them a lot of the network development, developing those professional relationships through a mentorship component, as well as several networking events and opportunities for feedback, and mock interviews. I think it was Jenny who mentioned interviews as well in her slides. And this is one area this is one area of support where we try to hone in on as well, is so that we can help our students to prepare for interviews and know what an interview in Canada is like, and if they've never had one before, to get some feedback and that one-on-one practice. And they receive support both through the program, but also through the mentorship component. So all students who are involved with the Study and Stay final year program do have a mentor, and we've had hundreds of mentors from various different sectors involved in the program. So these are just some of the key areas where where some of our learning happens in the program. So I mentioned Study and Stay Connect. So if you can think of Connect as kind of the umbrella project, and underneath the Study and Stay Connect project, we again have those two programs. The first is that Study and Stay final year capstone program for those 100 international students in their final year of study. They go through a screening and a selection made up of all of our key partners, institutions. So we select them. They receive a 10-month cohort-based pre-employment support program, and they all come out to a retreat. We do an immersive experience there. We have a big networking event where we bring many of our partners together. And I should say networking events, because we also help to connect them to different networking events that are happening in different areas of the province, depending on where they're studying. One of the pieces of the project as well as the BEST conference. So this stands for Building Employment Skills for Successful Transitions. And this is an international student conference that also involves our key participating institutions and is open to all international students in the province. We do ask that our students in the Study and Stay program attend the BEST conference as part of the program. And then of course we have a formal graduation, and we celebrate all of the successes. And these students, so it's 100 international students, but again, if a student does not get accepted into this final year immersive program, they can still attend the Study and Stay Foundations program. So Foundations is new this year, and this is the Foundations program is for all students in all years of their studies, and there's different levels and modules designed based on the year of study of the student. So this program, we hope to have 400 students per year attend, and we've just started, well, we're just launching it right now. So it's one that's still in development, whereas our capstone program has been now in its 7th year. So we're really excited about these new initiatives, and I'll just tell you a little bit more about them in these slides here. So again, the Study and Stay capstone, these are the pillars of programming support that the program is built upon. So we have the intercultural and professional communication, early career supports, networking, employer connection development, community integration, mentorship, and access to immigration supports, as well as entrepreneurship. And these not only make up the capstone program, but they also make up the Foundations program. And so with the Foundations program, that's the one that I mentioned is for sort of a choose your own adventure or choose your own program learning, depending on what year of study an international student is in. So in their 1st and 2nd years, for example, we would recommend that students participate in the level 1 and 2, which is really focused on getting them campus involved in their campus, understanding what those supports are at their campus as well as in their community. And then as they transition into their 3rd and 4th years of study, they would move on to complete the early career supports level 3 and 4, and also those employer connections. Now with our community colleges, if a program is only 2 years, of course, a student can definitely take that level 2 if they're in their 2nd year, but they don't have to stop there. We can also recommend that they take the level 3 and level 4 because they are also in their final year. So this is sort of, I guess, a program where students move at their own pace. They can attend as they like. We've got each level has videos. We've got learning components. We've got sort of learning challenges and little quizzes. So it's really a modular learning. So students really feel and understand where they can get levels of support. And again, they don't have to wait till their final year of study to receive any supports through the Study and Stay project. The other piece of the Study and Stay project is that we are now with the Connect project using an app. So through the iSent app, we've developed a way that more students can access programs. So they can use this app to access tasks, videos, recordings, resources, know about events, know about jobs. We also post job opportunities. They can book appointments with program coordinators and career coaches. And in addition, here I'll just mention this because this is a fantastic part of the program, the conference that I mentioned. We just had ours in March. Hundreds of international students attend this as part of the project, and it's open to all students and in collaboration with our community partners. Okay. So some of our successes I've mentioned, we've had over 400 students complete the program with 86% retention. Many students we see become mentors and support other students once they graduate. Last year, we had 88 mentors supporting 73 students. Most of these mentors had been with us since 2016. And in a survey, we had 27 program graduates say that they found they were hired directly because of their mentor or their support from their mentor. So it's a very diverse program, on average about 27 nationalities of about 100 students. And we have also the entrepreneurship stream. So we pivot the program and we can remodel it based on the needs of our students. Okay. And I think this program really has been successful because it really highlights that collaboration. And in Nova Scotia, we are all working together to support our students. And there's different ways that our employers and our community leaders have been involved, from mentors, from panelists. They come out to our networking events. There's been sponsorship and repeat and new employers who really see the value of international students and would like to hire them on. So I think through this, we are also building inclusive organizations, because our employers learn firsthand from the experiences of international students themselves, and it really helps to bridge that kind of early stage talent. And finally, again, why has it been so successful? Because of our multi-stakeholder participation and partners. We are all aligned with that one goal to support Nova Scotia and the success of international students. We learn from and with each other and remodel and pivot as needed. We continue to maintain that student-centered framework. And I think, the other thing is we work with motivated students who really demonstrate that they want to put in the work and that they're here to invest in themselves and their futures in Nova Scotia. And collaboration is key. And I think that is sort of what the takeaway is that it takes time to build relationships, but it's definitely worth it when you have those players working together to support the holistic students that are part of our province and Canada. So I guess I'll leave it at that. I think we're right on time, and I'll say thank you, and we'll open it up to questions shortly. I know Lisa's going to just say a few more things, and then I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Yes, thank you everyone so much for your insights on this. This has been great. As we mentioned, Alex was supposed to be here and wasn't able to make it today. So the other speakers were able to expand their presentations a bit. I just wanted to quickly present 3 of his slides about BC's Settlement and Integration Services, which launched in 2018. If you recall, in the beginning of the session, I mentioned that temporary residents are not eligible for all settlement supports. We've heard that shared by some others as well. But in some provinces like BC, there are some services that are available to temporary residents, which include international students. So we really wanted to show and highlight what BC is doing. In this slide, it kind of gives an overview of the eligible services and eligible clients in BC in terms of temporary residents, which again began in 2018. So I can't go into this in detail without Alex, but we just really wanted to mention that there are some of these services that are available to international students that are funded by the province and provided through local settlement agencies. You can see here that they're generally only available if they're not provided by their institution. So the students are expected to go to their institutions first and only seek support through this program at settlement agencies if they're not available from their institution or they're not sufficient. So it's kind of like a supplement to the private system through the higher education sector, but it's not very well integrated with the higher education sector, I would say. And so we see there's a lot of potential, at least I personally think there's potential for deeper collaboration. And if you're interested in more of the specifics about the role that BC plays, you can look up the programs online as noted in the link here. And finally, just to finish this conversation and then frame the questions, this chart from Alex shows that in British Columbia, how substantial the international student proportion among temporary immigration flows to BC really are. International students are in gray there. You can see the growth over time. And so when we talk about settlement services for temporary residents in Canada as part of this two-step, and for international students, I would say three-step migration process, international students are just such a major component of that. And this is the conversation that we were hoping to open up with this webinar. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And now we're going to turn over to the Q&A session. I do see that there were 3 questions directed at Jenny initially, and she has mentioned some of those answers in the chat. So perhaps we'll turn to Rupa now. Rupa, there's 2 questions. I'll combine them and perhaps you can respond to both. The person asking the question, love the presentation, very interesting. Could you please elaborate more on the impact of intersectional identities on international students' experiences of exploitation and resilience, which is something that was briefly mentioned. And the second question is, could you please elaborate on how the Charter helps community and settlement organizations, as well as all 3 levels of government, to effectively support international students in Brampton?
Thanks for those questions.
So 2 big questions.
I'm just going to touch on them briefly, but a lot of the information is in the web links. Once you go into the amount of data and look at the charter itself, it'll answer some of your questions. But really, I think one of the interesting aspects for me was and it actually became one of the first principles for the charter, where there was a clear understanding that we needed a clearer and more direct appreciation that the international student experience, because the term international student makes us feel like there's this one kind of a student with one face, with one kind of identity and experience, is really a clear understanding that we needed to understand that international student experiences are far more complex, they're multidimensional, and they're very distinctive in orientation, and they're very heterogeneous. And I think through the whole experience, something that Jenny mentioned as well, issues around gender were very key and important in terms of understanding the experiences of international students, but how gender then intersects with religion, how gender then intersects with other sexual identities, and influences the experience of a particular group of international students came to the forefront. So this idea of, I think, the key, one of the other interesting aspects of the reason why I bring this idea of intersectional identities is because one of the other important components that came through the discussions was how rarely EDI, equity, diversity, inclusion issues are applied to this group of international students. How rarely we understand international students as an EDI group that has some of the same challenges and need the same support and all of that. So I think there was also a recognition that there needs to be a broader commitment in bringing international students to EDI tables, to bring those conversations in terms of understanding international student issues as our overall objective, as key components of where our overall objectives are for EDI. So that intersectional identity component comes into play in really complicating our understanding of the international student experience. And I don't want to go on. You'll see it in the charter, but as I said, it became one of the first guiding principles that the charter laid out. The second question was about community agencies.
Yeah, the second question, elaboration on how the charter helps community and settlement organizations and government support international students, maybe how it's operationalized.
Well, that's the key component of it, in the sense it lays out very clearly that there are roles and responsibilities for governments at all three levels. So it recognizes the different levels of government and their responsibilities, along with post-secondary institutions, along with community organizations. But the charter specifically lays out, for example, how and why there has to be a collaborative effort, how and why there needs to be partnership, how and why there needs to be funding put into certain initiatives and by whom. So it does lay out very clearly the role, and it acknowledges very clearly the role of very many different organizations. I hope that answers your question, but I'd be happy to connect with you individually or even show you in the charter how that is done. But there's a lot in terms of really enabling those partnerships and collaborations across all levels of government, across governments and community settlement agencies. So for example, it'll spell out that the provincial government needs to include funding for community organizations so that they are enabled in their support for international students, things like that. So it clearly lays out certain funding as well as partnership approaches. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thanks, Rupa. There's two other questions that are related to intersectionality that I'll just read there. One person wrote in the chat a question for Jenny about the fact that female international students earned a lower income and was curious if there were any other demographic differences. And Jenny mentioned that their research team hasn't had a chance to do that analysis yet. However, they will be looking at age, length of time in Canada, and other demographic factors in the analysis. And there's a question for Jennifer that I think is also related to intersectionality. Curious to know how your program ensures inclusivity and support for international students from diverse backgrounds, such as those from low-income households, for example.
Yeah, well, the program doesn't discriminate with anyone. I mean, we open it up to anyone who would like to attend. We really do what we can to have a diverse cohort in many different ways, in every different way. So knowing who our cohort is and who the students are, if someone comes to us and really requires extra levels of support, we will not turn them away. We will do what we can to make sure that they are a part of it, that they're getting the right supports needed. So I think in all ways, like we allow people who want to be a part of the program to be a part of it. And certainly with the Study and Stay final year, like with that's limited to 100 students, but we do have a selection committee that looks at all different, different areas, like students who apply and what their supports are and how can we involve them. And if they can't make it into the final year student, let's do what we can to connect them to the resources they need on their campus or to get them involved in the Study and Stay Foundations program. So I hope that answers.
Great. Thank you so much, Jennifer. I'd like to turn it over to Jenny, who hasn't gotten a chance to respond yet. I can see that she's typing an answer to the most recent question, which is the fact that international students have to pay 3 times the tuition compared to domestic students has affected me. And it really highlights how international education prioritizes profit over people. Curious to know your thoughts. So Jenny, would you like to respond to that?
Sure. So what I was typing is that among provinces, BC actually has the second highest retention rate of international students at 1 and 5 years after graduation. So I think Alberta has the highest rate and we have the second highest rate. But BC, the students in BC, even so we have a very low transition rate to PR, but even those who have transitioned to PR, so whether they're in a postgraduate work permit or in PR, they're disproportionately employed in low wage service sector jobs. So actually, in BC in particular, and there's new research that's just about to come out by Dr. Sandra Schoenerl from UBC on this topic. Basically, their education doesn't have any impact on their employment outcomes. They just end up taking the same low wage service sector jobs that they would have got anyway, like at McDonald's or Walmart or wherever it is. So the question is, what do I think about the tuition fees? And I kind of think in that context, they're almost like a head tax. It's just this like amount of money that international students have to pay to post-secondary to support to make up for the shortfall in government funding. And then they go out and get the same jobs that they would have got anyway. So yeah, that's kind of my thoughts, maybe a bit cynical. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jenny. I recognize that we're at the end of the presentation, and I'd just like to give Rupa and Jennifer the opportunity maybe to give a quick hot take, 1-minute comment if you'd like to respond to anything Jenny said or any of the questions that were done. So Jennifer or Rupa, would you like to share anything?
Go ahead, Rupa.
I was going to say, as I read the question, I think unless we do something about, I mean, we've developed a system which has created this problem, right? Where we have created a system where international students have become, the government has allowed that to happen, where, they've sort of turned a not blind eye, but I would say directly encourage recruitment of international students for funding purposes to meet the funding, the funding that they have drawn over the years. So I would go out and say international student fees need to get regulated. They cannot be deregulated the way they have been, because if we continue down this road, we've seen what's happened in Australia. We're already headed in that direction. It's just going to get worse, and we are not going to shift our perspectives on international students unless the government steps in. Yes, there is a funding issue in post-secondary education, but international students are not a solution to that funding issue. We as a society need to decide whether we think investment in post-secondary education is part and parcel of what we need to do as a population or not, and if that's the direction we want to head or not. And I think really you need a deregulated system, not a deregulated, you need a regulation of international students the way we're headed. So as controversial or problematic that might be, I'm going to, this is my thought on it.
Yes, and I was just going to say, I agree. We as a society also have a responsibility to invest in working together to support our international students to make sure that they have opportunities and are successful in being able to stay here post-graduation if that's what they so like. So I think that it's important for us to share our models of collaboration and keep talking to each other about this very important topic.
Well, on that note, thank you all very much for attending this session. Thank you on behalf of myself and the speakers to P2P for organizing this. You can contact us after the session to invite some of this collaboration, and we look forward to future conversations. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Lisa, for coordinating and getting us together. Thank you.